that are reducing deforestation, restoring degraded lands at scale at either national or subnational level. And it's my absolute privilege to be moderating today's session. We've got a great lineup. We've got a lot of people coming up on stage. You can see there's quite a few chairs and there will be more, and I'll go through the agenda in a second. But before I do that and introduce Tim Christofferson, the Vice President for Climate Action here at Salesforce, I do want to say a big thank you to Tim and the Salesforce team for generously hosting us today in this really beautiful setting with the gorgeous view of London. So big thank you, Tim and the organizing teams. So today, in terms of the agenda, we're going to start off with a little bit of context setting from Tim. So, why tropical forests? Why are they so important for our global biodiversity, nature, climate, and sustainable development goals? I'll then invite up Matthias Berninger from Bayer, who will join Tim for a fireside chat, talking about why tropical forests from the lens of corporate action. Why are tropical forests so important in terms of corporate climate, nature, and resiliency strategies? We'll then turn to the forest perspective. We're going to beam in some stakeholders and community members from Ecuador, as well as the Ecuadorian government, to share the value of forests from an economic livelihood point of view, but also the sociocultural value and wider ecosystem, biodiversity, rainfall benefits that tropical forests provide to communities living in and adjacent to forests, as well as globally as a society. We're then very, very pleased to have two forest country representatives with us today from the government of Vietnam, as well as the Amazonian Environmental Research Institute, EPAM. So very much looking forward to hearing the perspective around what does forest conservation, preservation, and restoration look like at scale around the world. So once we've covered the why and some of the what, we're then going to turn to the how. For the corporates in the room, how do you lean into this space? How do you stand up with confidence and credibility to support the amazing work that's happening globally to preserve tropical forests? We're going to have a fair amount of time for discussion, as long as we can get through all of that and have enough time for your questions. So please do tally those as we go through. We'll have some time for questions and discussions before we turn to our keynote closing remarks from Minister McCarthy, Minister for Climate here in the UK, telling us and sharing with us the UK's perspective on why tropical forests are so key to our climate, nature, as well as sustainable development goals. So lots to get through, but again, a big thanks to Salesforce and Tim. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Tim to set some of the context of why we're all here today. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Edwina. And I would like to start by thanking all of you for being here. I know it's a busy week for all of us, and all of you are champions in your own right for nature and for forests. So I hope we have time for discussion afterwards. What I would like all of us to think about is we are an ecosystem of actors and organizations and partners and investors and policymakers. And just like in nature, collaboration is much more common than competition. So think about that as we move forward and use this event to become an ecosystem of action, also in the networking afterwards. And Salesforce is proud to host all of you today because we are in several of these coalitions that you see up there in the logos. It started in 2020 with the Trillion Trees initiative that we co-founded with the World Economic Forum. There are now over 90 companies that are investing and have committed 10 billion trees to be conserved or restored. And in addition, there are government pledges under the Trillion Trees initiative of 122 billion trees. So there's a lot of pledges and commitments. So we will have to find out together how we can do that most effectively. And then obviously the LEAF Coalition came a little bit later. We are also a co-founder of, or an early company in the LEAF Coalition. And that aims to invest at the jurisdictional level in avoided deforestation. And last but not least, we're also proud to be a co-founder of the Symbiosis Coalition, which we'll hear from later, together with Meta, Microsoft, and Google, making 20 million tons offtake agreements for high quality nature-based removals. So we cover basically a lot of the things that need to happen on forests. And I was at a dinner last night with Minister Marina Silva of Brazil and Ana Toni, who's the COP30 secretary. As we go into COP30, the first COP in the Amazon, which will be the forest COP, they made it very clear that they want all of us to think of climate finance in future as also being nature finance. That is one of the main objectives at COP30. So you've come to the right place here today to hear about all these different angles of investments, in particular for the private sector. So for those of you who are corporate, from a corporate background, from companies, I think that's about 60% of the people in the room. If you're already investing in forest, great. If you're forest curious, also great. Let's turn that into action and talk to the other companies here that are investing about what we've learned, what we can do together through 1T.org, through the LEAF Coalition, through Symbiosis. And we will hear later about why to engage in forests, but let me also highlight the role of technology. We're in a tech company's building here, and Salesforce has been developing a lot of tools that can help governments and companies and NGOs better invest in forests. We have, for example, around 60,000 NGO customers, and by making their lives easier and more effective, and by limiting the time they have to spend on filling out donor reports or applications, we can support in the future a much more efficient progress on forests. And I want to highlight one thing in particular, as we're helping the World Economic Forum and the Trillion Trees Initiative to build their first forest AI agent that will help to identify and source and then action forest solutions across these 90 plus companies, but also across anybody who wants to engage in forests in the future. And we've done several of these agents now for other NGOs, one for the ocean as well, with the Ocean Risk Resilience and Action Alliance last week in Nice at the UN's Oceans Conference. 2 weeks ago, we launched that agent to help Aura make links between ocean investors, and ocean projects. So if you're interested to hear more about our Salesforce Accelerator for Impact with a focus on AI and the current phase of AI that we're in, which is agentic AI, so the next phase after generative AI, you can learn more here at the QR code. So with that, and welcome. We would like to open now and hand back over to Edwina for our first discussion. I hope we can do this as interactive as possible because, as I said, all of you are nature and forest champions in your own right. So I'm sure you have a lot to share and discuss and contribute. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tim. So in terms of being interactive, we should be having another QR code coming up just here in a second to get a sense of who's in the room. As Tim put it, either investing in forests or forest curious. And while that comes up and you get your phones out and engage with this survey here, I'd like to invite Tim and Matthias up for our fireside chat, please. So come on up. I think we're starting over here. Wonderful. So far, it's looking like we've got a bunch of peer organizations that are readily investing in this space, a few that are exploring options, not yet committed, but it doesn't look like we're quite starting at the very beginning here. But while those are loading, welcome, Matthias. Thank you again, Tim. Would love to hear a little bit from the corporate perspective. Maybe to start with you, Matthias, if that's okay. And thanks so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about why tropical forests in the context of Bayer. How does that support your business strategy? And importantly, why nature-based solutions and some of the climate finance engagements that Tim outlined here? How and why are you engaging in this space?
I'm not sure. Oh no, I am sure this works. So good morning, everybody. There are a bunch of reasons why we are engaged. To start with, our climate strategy is basically to cut our emissions in half by 2030, to then repeat that by 2040, and to have a third go at it, and by 2050, really kind of end up with the not to abate or really hard to abate emissions. And that's, in my book, the back of the envelope calculation that every company that says we are still in, we are supporting Paris, we want to stay in the 1.5 or well below 2 degree corridor would have to do. But the math only works if you, while you are aggressive on cutting your emissions, if you also offset the rest. If you only focus on cutting your emissions, we will not be able to achieve what we need to achieve. And you can take my word for it or read about it in the IPCC report. It's pretty clearly stated there. Now, if you want to invest in reducing and also removing emissions, then nature-based solutions are the ones that are readily available now. They will be complemented by other solutions over time, but the rules of thermodynamics make it really, really difficult, for example, to achieve the same nature can achieve with technology-driven direct air capture in the near future. So from that vantage point, really important. When I look at our value chain, the other reason why it's really important, and there is a hint in the name, rainforest. We are heavily invested in agriculture. Arguably, in our history as a company, we acquired one that wasn't as focused on forest protection as we would be. But what's pretty clear, for example, for the agricultural system in South America, is without the forest, there is no rain. Without the rain, there is no viable business model for agriculture. And here we are at the point where nature plays a really important role in providing services that have been ignored and or taken for granted for too long. So we also see this as an investment in our value chain. And one of the things we are working on, for example, is tackling what you can legally deforest in Brazil. It's the most aggressive forest protection law in the world, the Forest Code in Brazil. And I think the government led by President Lula has made great progress in curbing and fighting illegal deforestation. But there is still quite a large amount of forest that farmers could cut legally, and they could clear land legally because it would superficially be more profitable for them. So finding ways to dissuade them from doing that. We have a large program called Pro Carbono that does exactly that, that mobilizes the value chain in order to offer a deal that we believe is better for those farms than cutting like land on their property or forests on their property legally. So these are a couple of initiatives we are engaged in. Last but not least, LEAF has been really an amazing partner for us in driving this agenda, and not only finding credible solutions for carbon offsettings and carbon removals, but also creating broader coalitions to tackle the topic in a more holistic way.
Great. Thank you, Matthias. So very much core to core business, but also core to achieving overall climate goals. And Tim, you shared a little bit of context here around how sort of important Salesforce has been across a number of coalitions and initiatives in this space. But can you share a little bit more about, how did Salesforce get here? How did you decide to take action on tropical forest? And then second, how did you sort of choose to step into this space? What would be the kind of first steps for companies that are still exploring this space?
So to other companies in the room and also colleagues from NGOs, and want to deal with one perception right away, and that is that investments in the voluntary carbon market are an either or to climate action, We're in a LEED Gold certified building. We just refreshed our science-based target as Salesforce. We have a 67% Scope 1 and 2 and 68% Scope 3 near-term reduction target, which we're on a good way to achieve. So it is not for us an either or. We can do both, and we have to do both right now. This is the thing for tropical forests, that we cannot wait until 2040 with compensating for residual emissions. We have to invest right now because nature needs that money. Forests and in particular tropical forests need that funding right now. So for anybody who's thinking about it, let me just reiterate the urgency of investing right now. We also see that there's, of course, compliance that will deal more aggressively with climate change as the impacts come closer for all of our economies, for all of our businesses. And there's been a bit of a roller coaster in regulation and the certainty around it and differences between different countries and governments and what they do. But in overall, the trajectory is towards clearer regulatory framework, including here in the UK, on carbon markets, including in the EU. So for companies to engage, it is also the smart thing to do to be there early and to be part of that research and development phase of a carbon market, because we clearly need carbon markets as part of the solution for climate action. They're not this, they're not going to solve everything, but what markets are good at, and it's the only thing they're good at actually, is an efficient match between price and demand, supply and demand at a reasonable quality. That's what markets do. So they channel money effectively, and that's why we need them as part of the solution package for climate action. Tropical forests for us are important for a variety of reasons. I'll not go into them, but as a tech company, for example, we rely a lot on water for data center cooling. And we've just started to map where those dependencies are. Water is a material topic for us. And forests, as we all know, can help with water quality, with water quantity, with water availability over time. So this is one of the material reasons for us, but there are other reasons for many other companies. And I would say of all the Fortune 500 companies, every company definitely has their own business case for investing in nature.
Wonderful. I'm getting the time sign already, which is unfortunate because I feel like we're just getting going. But maybe just to wrap up this part of the session, we've heard the need for this, a compelling call to action, but also an urgency. So for the companies and organizations in the room, what would be your one piece of advice for them to take away to action after today and this week in London?
Those of you who are already investing in renewable energy realize that the demand for renewable energy, for example, in my home country in the United States, is now suddenly greater than what's actually on display, partially given the changes in the US government. But those who have early invested in those renewable energy capabilities are actually in a better position. If we believe that there is a problem with our climate, and if we project 5 to 10 years out, being an early mover on nature-based solutions puts you also in a position of competitive advantage. So those who say, let's wait a little bit, also will lose early access to highly credible and assured solutions. And that is something you should factor in. And those of you who get the conversation of what should we do, either reduce our emissions or invest in offsetting solutions, Tim, I think you gave the answer. The answer is a big plus. You should do both. You shouldn't choose. And we can't afford that choice to be even embraced by NGOs who are skeptical about nature-based solutions in a time where money needs to be mobilized to go in that direction.
First of all, it's just the right thing to do. And we all know that, but that does not always convince your chief finance officer or your board to engage. So for that step, just lean on the 100+ companies that are in these coalitions, learn from them, talk to us so that you can start not from the very beginning, but do start small and do start now. That's the key message I would have, because there's a lot of excitement building up towards COP30. There's a lot of momentum in governments, private sector, civil society, all moving in the same direction. That has never been there before. So it's a very exciting time for forest and nature investments. So start small if you have to, but then build up. Start right now and learn from anyone who's already on that journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So start now. Start small if you have to, and get on the road to Belém later this year. Wonderful. So I'm going to transition now. I think we're to all stay up here if that's okay. And we're going to now turn to forest jurisdictions. Here are some of the voices from Ecuador. So Ecuador is very well known for its natural and cultural diversity. Ecuador has also pioneered jurisdictional REDD+ for the last 10, 15 years. Really working across stakeholders in country on projects like the Sociobosque program, deforestation-free commodities, as well as national level restoration programs to essentially transact and prepare for the carbon markets. In January this year, the LEAF Coalition signed a $30 million agreement with Ecuador, opening up the opportunity for LEAF's private and public sector partners to contribute to Ecuador's efforts through the transaction of jurisdictional forest carbon credits. So now we're just going to turn to some footage shot earlier this year and some voices from the communities both in and adjacent to the forests that are so key to both delivering this work and also in terms of partners for the use of climate finance going forward to continue, sustain, and scale the work that Ecuador and other jurisdictions are doing. So cue video, please.
Los bosques son seres vivos como los seres humanos. El agua para nosotros es muy sagrado, es un ser vivo espiritual, igual que la naturaleza. Es nuestra casa, es nuestra vida.
Defiendo a mi selva y a nuestro río para que estén tranquilos los jóvenes, que vivan como antiguos, como eran nuestros abuelos.
El acuerdo que celebramos hoy con el gobierno de Ecuador es un hito importante para LEAF y muy importante. Este éxito no sería posible sin la participación de los pueblos indígenas amazónicos representados por Conafanay y el pueblo afroecuatoriano representado por Cane y el pueblo Montubio.
Traemos esta noticia de gran importancia y esperanza que nos ayudará a fortalecer la lucha contra el cambio climático y además de eso mejorar la calidad de vida de las familias ecuatorianas y abrir puertas a nuevas oportunidades de desarrollo ambiental, económico y social.
Esperamos que muchos más estados sigan el ejemplo de Ecuador y accedan a fondos LEAF para proteger y restaurar sus bosques.
No estamos para oponernos, más bien estamos para aportar y dar solución al Estado ecuatoriano, porque todos somos parte de esto y todos necesitamos ese apoyo y construir un país diferente, un país que en verdad resuelve los problemas de los pueblos nacionales, del sector campesino, del sector productor.
Lo que se puede hacer, lo mejor, es bajar en el territorio, conocer con la gente, involucrar a la gente, que ellos digan qué quieren hacer con esos recursos y sobre todo los recursos económicos monetarios para las nacionalidades y los pueblos amazónicos principalmente es nuevo.
Podemos decir que
hemos estado como que excluidos de muchos beneficios que en su momento los gobiernos de pronto de turno han estado desarrollando con los otros pueblos, las otras nacionalidades, pero hoy nuestra participación, nuestra inclusión nos va a permitir estar más seguros del cuidado que tenemos que darle a la biodiversidad y la respuesta que tenemos que darle al cambio climático. Este es un acuerdo muy importante para nosotros.
Great. So Ecuador is just, yeah, let's give it a. So I hope that shares a little bit of a glimmer and insight into the really fantastic work that Ecuador is doing through a combination of government policy at scale, but also importantly, partnership with local communities, indigenous peoples, Afro-Ecuadorian and Kimbola communities that are really the stewards of the forest to be able to reduce deforestation and associated emissions at scale. And as the video said, currently Ecuador is going through an extensive consultation process to help co-create, design, and deliver the next wave of jurisdictional REDD+ policies and programs. So Ecuador is not the only fantastic example. I'm going to move over to the other side so there's some room. We also have today representatives from both Vietnam and Brazil. So if I could please welcome Ms. Thuy to come up to the stage, please. Ms. Thuy represents the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development from Vietnam. And thank you very much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you here today. We also have Gabriela Sain, who's here from the Amazon Environmental Research Institute, EPAM, that is working very closely with the Amazonian states on their jurisdictional REDD+ policies and programs. So thanks for being with us today, Gabriela. So to kick us off, I think would love to hear a little bit from Vietnam in terms of, thank you, the perspective, Ms. Thuy, of the work that Vietnam has been doing to reduce deforestation nationally, restore lands, and how you're doing that with credibility and stakeholder participation across the board. So thanks for being with us to share your perspective.
Hi. Good morning. My name is Sri. I'm the officer of Vietnam Administration of Forestry. Last night, at the event of the UN REDD, I share about the status of the REDD in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we have two programs in the REDD and one program about the FCPF program. And we are transfer 10.3 million ton emissions reduction of the FCPF to FCPF now. And now we are preparing the negotiation with the LEAP coalition, which expected to transfer at least of 5 million ton CO2 for the LEAP coalition, and that the credit is issued by the R3. R3 is the standard for with the high integrity, and in terms of the tree registration, we have the inclusion of IPLC to the REDD+ implementation, and we had consensus of the ethnic minority. In Vietnam, we have more than 20 million people who living nearing the forest, who their livelihood to be depend on the forest, and we have the inclusion the IPLC in the REDD+ and in the sharing the payment from that REDD+ now, and we have the involving all of the stakeholder from the central to the local to the commitment with the JREDD now, and I think this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think you touched on a really great point. You know, the World Bank FCPF program. We also know about the Red Early Movers, the Green Climate Fund. You know, where we're coming in and bringing in the private sector at the moment is based on a long, efforts and foundations that have been built over the last 10 to 15 years, producing really fantastic results. So thank you so much for sharing. And on that sort of note around, the partners that support jurisdictions in achieving emissions reductions from their jurisdictional RED programs, all eyes are on Brazil at the moment, of course, as the host of COP30 later this year. But Gabriela, can you tell us a little bit more about the work at subnational level in Brazil that Brazilian states are taking to reduce deforestation and how EPAM is supporting them in doing that?
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks, Edwina, for your question. So I will trying to bring a perspective from the civil society, from the technical assistance for the states. We support the Amazon states in building readiness for jurisdictional REDD+ systems, align with the international standards and all of our legal framework as well, national legal framework as well. And we understand that private climate finance, especially through carbon markets, can drive deep transformation in forest regions. When it flows through the jurisdictional systems, it builds long-term infrastructure, governance, monitoring, and inclusion. Jurisdictional REDD+ is not just about carbon, and this is our perspective. It's not only about carbon, it's a legacy. And now at COP30, we have the Amazon states working a lot to have this structure and to make this legacy for the forests. This creates institutional platforms to manage forests and channel finance through carbon or no carbon credits, through ecosystem services, biodiversity finance, public-private investment, as well as our colleague was talking earlier. So we understand that investing in these systems means co-investing in a foundation for impact at scale. States like Pará, Acre, Mato Grosso, Tocantins, they are moving forward with safeguards, benefit sharing, and transparency. And we estimate that they are starting to have like between 15 and 70 million tons of carbon to put in the carbon market and have this opportunity to achieve the climate finance. But we must overcome 3 challenges that I want to put here because we have to work together. The first one is time. Systemic change takes longer, but delivers durable results. The second one is land tenure. We need legal certainty and justice for forest people. The third one is finance. We need funding for readiness, not just for credits, because we need to build this infrastructure. And when we talk about integrity, it's not only about methodologies, it's about transformation. High integrity credits should support long-term impact on the ground. And civil society is in this for a long time, for a long run. We work across political cycles to support climate governance that is inclusive and robust. And we believe that this could de-risking the risk of supporting the jurisdictional REDD+. These systems are the foundation for lasting change. We must invest in them because climate and nature are the key of the livable future. So my message to all is simple. Let's go treating forest finance and not more like an experiment, but start to treating it as a long-term commitment.
Wonderful, beautifully said. I was going to say what would be your passing words or your requests to those in the audience, but I think that put it perfectly. And I'm also getting the time signal for us to move on, unfortunately. But thank you both, Gabriela, Visui. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your perspectives. If I could kindly ask you to stay up on stage, we're going to bring up some more people. It's going to get crowded up here, but hopefully good for the discussion and the Q&As. But, you know, we've heard a compelling call to action. We've heard about the amazing work that's being done to really transform and create new systems of governance, of credibility of results to really drive down emissions from deforestation and restore forests. So the question to the audience then, for those in the room representing companies or organizations that operate in the space, you know, what's your biggest challenge? What is stopping you from stepping in and supporting this type of amazing work that's been represented today from Ecuador, Vietnam, and Brazil as well? So as you scan the code and fill that out, I would like to invite our next panel to the stage to talk about some of the coalitions and different initiatives that are available to support companies in the private sector to step in here. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Julia Strong from the Symbiosis Coalition, as we heard, which is pulling together a collective demand signal for high integrity restoration and removals projects. I'd like to invite up Erin Bloomgarden, founder and CEO of Emergent and the LEAF Coalition, and Jack Hurd as well from the Tropical Forest Alliance and the World Economic Forum. I think I'm going to go back to the other side of the room and try and pose my questions from over here from a distance. But let's get going and let's have a look at some of the keywords that are coming through. Okay, so we've got reputational risk, the business case, money, the finance to be able to do this. It sounds like we've got some folks that are involved on the implementation side that are looking for offtake demand, a bit of certainty. Okay, so some keywords coming through in and around, I think, giving corporates in the private sector confidence to step into this space. And reputational risk is very loud and clear in large print there. So maybe if I could turn to Erin first. Tell us a little bit about the coalitions that exist, how they've been purposely built, addressing maybe some of the reputational and integrity concerns that the private sector might have.
Well, thanks, Edwina, and thank you all for coming. And it's great to be here on this panel. And so Edwina mentioned the coalitions that have been created, and we'll hear from Julia about the Symbiosis Coalition and Jack, I guess, also about the other coalitions. But sometimes we refer to these as advanced market commitments. But look, I think part of the really key value proposition of these coalitions is to do things with high integrity and to do things in partnership. And so with the LEAF Coalition, we have, it is truly a public-private partnership. So we have 30 corporates and we have 3 donor governments, UK, Norway, and the US. And, you know, I'm looking at that reputational risk bullet. This has been, you know, I've been in carbon markets for over 20 years. This is not new. This has been around since the very beginning, and actually why the standards were created in the first place. You know, this wasn't the first Guardian article that came out, and so when we designed the LEAF Coalition, and probably the story is going to be similar also with Symbiosis and others, we sought to create something that really locked in high integrity from the very beginning. And so, what does that mean? And as was mentioned earlier, it's not just the methodology. It's not just on ensuring that the credits are real and additional on the supply side. It's also the full sort of value proposition and the way credits are transacted. And so what does that mean for LEAF? Well, it means fundamentally we've set up Emergent as a nonprofit. So we get asked a lot, what is LEAF and what is Emergent? So just to clarify that, LEAF is the name of the partnership, the coalition. There's not an entity called LEAF. The entity is Emergent, and Emergent is both the coordinator of the LEAF Coalition and also the transaction platform, right? So we are the buyers to the host jurisdictions, to the countries, and we are the sellers to the corporate. And we deliberately made Emergent a nonprofit to ensure the integrity, to make sure there's transparency, to make sure that we're maximizing the flow of finance to the host jurisdictions. We were also, even before sort of VCMI and ICVCM and these other integrity initiatives, we created buyer criteria. So buyers, if they're going to participate in LEAF, they have to ensure that they are taking action within their own value chains and operations before purchasing offsets. And so we also have a provision where if credits are resold, the profits need to come back to funneled back to the jurisdictions. So integrity is key, but also the confidence of companies working together, sharing information, and some validation with the public sector partners. And so that all has been very, very helpful and useful. And I'm sure I don't want to talk about Symbiosis or others, but that has been core to the way that LEAF is operated.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. And I think that piece around integrity, but also the confidence of working both with public as well as other corporate peers is really key. And I think similar maybe to sort of Symbiosis and thinking about how to give corporates confidence and the private sector confidence, but also reduce some of the barriers to entry. So maybe, Julia, can you tell us a little bit about Symbiosis, about the work that you're doing and the benefits of taking a collective approach?
Sure. Well, great to be here with everyone today. And I don't know about you, but I every day increasingly feel the urgency of this challenge. And so we really need to think about how can we work collectively together to drive action now. And so Symbiosis Coalition was founded, we've been about a year now. We were founded at the end of May of last year by Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Meta, and McKinsey, focused on how can we drive demand and then scale supply for the next generation of high integrity nature-based carbon removal projects. And what does high integrity mean? I think one of the challenges in this space is that there are all these different definitions. There's confusion about what good looks like, but the folks on the panel today, I'm sure would agree that high integrity means conservative carbon accounting, making sure that actually you're having your intended impact on the climate, engaging local communities and indigenous peoples from project design all the way through implementation, ensuring that there's equitable benefit and compensation for indigenous peoples and local communities all the way through the project design and implementation. There's environmental benefit, so positive outcomes for biodiversity, and then there's durability. These are lasting projects, and then transparency, so understanding actually did the project have its intended impact, and how can we make sure continue to learn and grow as science gets better, as we get better at understanding the impact of our work. So Symbiosis was founded to really try to address the uncertainty around what good looks like and the uncertainty around demand, because without demand, there won't be the scale of projects that we need to address the climate challenge. And so we're an advanced market commitment, a coalition of buyers dedicated to that next generation of carbon removal. And we have 4 pillars. One is this advanced market commitment, volume commitment to sign long-term offtake agreements to give certainty to projects, to communities, to investors. We have a unified quality criteria that's built on those principles that I just mentioned, a joint RFP, so helping companies actually to identify those projects and translate that commitment into action, because these projects are challenging and complex to get right. And not every company should have a PhD in economics, nor expert in how to navigate land tenure rights across various jurisdictions and various geographies. So how can we help companies make it easy, give them an easy button to participate, while at the same time being laser focused on integrity, and ensuring that the projects that they do identify and end up deciding to contract with actually result in the intended impact for people, climate, and biodiversity. So that's that joint RFP process, is to make it easier for companies to participate, also easier for developers at the same time, because not every developer who's engaged can participate with these large companies. Then at the final piece is market education. So sharing lessons learned, setting a blueprint for others to follow, because again, not every company should be setting up a team to try to figure out how to navigate the market. And we need to make sure it's easier for more capital to flow, more folks to sign long-term offtake agreements that can de-risk these projects to reach the scale of impact that's needed. So in terms of the question about coalitions and the value that they provide, it's really about how do we go as fast and as far as possible while maintaining a laser focus on integrity, not ever sacrificing that. And we need to be sharing lessons learned at this sort of earlier stage of the market to really accelerate that impact and find efficiency where we can. So, the point about starting small for companies, finding a way to get their foot in the door, the hope is that coalitions can do that and enable collective action, that if every company took just a tiny bit of action now, collectively, that's so much more impact and so much more demand that can drive more finance to local communities around the world who desperately need it for climate action today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julia. On the topic of collective action, would love to turn to Jack, and maybe you can share a little bit about Tropical Forest Alliance and what you're seeing in terms of the companies and the communities that you're working with as we approach COP30 in Belém. What are the sort of trends of collective action, where there's opportunity as well as maybe some of the gaps?
Okay, thank you very much, Edwina. And the problem with going last is most of the smart stuff has already come out, so I'll try to add some filler in there. I would like to, if I may, just step back a little bit and talk a little bit more broadly about how the World Economic Forum is looking at this, rather than just the Tropical Forest Alliance, which is one of the component pieces. I mean, obviously, 1T.org is a strong player in this as well. And so, when I think about it, the World Economic Forum has 1,000 business partners, and they exist everywhere on that continuum, from actively investing in forests and land use issues to being curious, to use Tim's term, down to something less than that, let's say, or totally disinterested. And so we're trying to approach the engagement with our business partners with sort of the following logic. We know that they often think about climate change in the area of energy production, mobility, and industry decarbonization and the built environment, and they rarely start to think about agriculture, land use, and forestry. And that's sort of a shame. We have to change that dynamic, because they haven't quite always realized that 25% of CO2 emissions is coming from the land use sector, and a lot of that is coming from deforestation. Most of them would realize, as with their policymaking partners, realize that stopping deforestation is a relatively straightforward value proposition. Right? We know it's a relatively straightforward value proposition to figure out, okay, stopping forests is probably good. What we've realized is in the conversations is that there's sort of four things that need to happen to stop deforestation. One of them is actually flooding a lot of resources into protecting standing forests. And this is where the carbon markets are really valuable. It's also where some of the conversation with the Tropical Forest Forever facility is heading. The second thing that needs to happen is we need to come up with a global approach to producing fiber for pulp, paper, packaging, construction materials, and everything else in a way that is not destructive of forests, but is more sustainable. A third thing we have to think about doing is, how do you change the agricultural production model so that we keep pressure off of forests and we actually intensify more output per hectare in the agricultural space? And then the fourth thing is restoring all the forests that have been lost, right? And so this is the place that we end the initial conversation and then begin the second part of the conversation with our business partners. And I think the restoration opportunity is really attractive because it can come in a lot of different ways, right? We see that a lot of people are interested in forests linked to commercial forest production as a way to generate revenues, and maybe carbon credits run alongside that or at a top off as part of an additional revenue stream. We see other companies that are sort of interested in the agriculture space and how do we restore agricultural land for productivity purposes, but also bring in carbon benefits along the side by building connectivity between other land uses that are in that space as well. We see others that are interested in just large scale restoration, hoping to finance the whole thing on the backs of carbon credits, and that's an equally viable thing. We've got sort of interesting examples all across the spectrum there of those things. I think the first part, and Tim, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, is you just got to get started, right? Just get started to get familiar with the system and understand where the best place of investment could be. And maybe I'll just end with one of the things that has often come up in these conversations is, okay, so we can do so much as a business, who else needs to play in this space? And I think that the role of business in engaging sufficiently with the public sector is super important on this. It was mentioned earlier by Gabriela about the idea of land tenure, right? Getting land tenure secure in a lot of tropical forest nations, super important in order to attract investment. There's other things that need to happen at the policy level that also crowd in investment. And so I think this collective action idea of bringing the finance sector, the public sector, the private sector, the civil society sector in to guarantee the credibility, as Aaron, you've mentioned here. I think that's sort of the conversation that's starting to reemerge within the 1T program and more broadly across the World Economic Forum. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack. So broadening out the conversation from the voluntary carbon markets to also those areas where private investment can play a really key role on the ground in support of the great work that at the public sector is doing across tropical forest regions. So with that, we're going to now turn our to the audience. I'd like to request any questions for our panelists. We've got a few minutes before our closing remarks to at least get the conversation and discussion going. Of course, it doesn't stop here. So please feel free to offer your questions. We've got a great group up here. I see Ruth from ProForest. Oh, there's a mic coming to you, Ruth.
So I don't have to yell, thanks. And that was great and really interesting. So I'm Ruth Nussbaum from ProForest. We work with companies on their supply chains, agriculture and forest supply chains. But the one thing that was really interesting and really helpful, the one word that didn't come up much was resilience, particularly in the face of what we are pivoting from let's try and stick at 1.5 to how the hell are we going to deal with 2? And I just wondered for me, all of what you're talking about fits very much into resilience too, but how do we frame the narrative to make sure we're not losing that?
Great question and great point. We're going to take a couple more and gather those and then turn to the panel. We have a question up front, please. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity and thank you for the panel for all the talks. It was brilliant to hear that there is some new traction on the area of forest conservation somehow. My question is, regarding one of the challenges when you made the poll for the challenges in one corner, which wasn't mine, by the way, there was the issue that someone pointed as complexity. And I feel that the whole infrastructure of the carbon credits and really understanding what needs to happen for it to be a good project is quite complex for investors on this side of the fence, for also for those communities that are working on the ground that do not have the resources or sometimes even the understanding of many of these bureaucracy and many of the issues. So my question is there any way in which, or do you foresee any way in which the process can be simplified somehow?
Great question. And we'll just take one more. I think over here on the far right was the fastest hand going up.
When we had that word cloud up there was probably 15 different things that meant the same thing, which is reputational risk, ability to finance, and confidence. Given this is the 6th boom bust cycle in carbon markets I've been involved in since I started trading carbon in the US in 1989, not 1889, but still 1989. How do you guys think about rebuilding confidence in the market? What are your respective organizations going to do to rebuild confidence in the market? Because the market is contrary to, I was in the elevator on the way up here, people, this is going to be a great climate week. There's twice as many events, but there's half as much money in the marketplace than there was a year ago. So I don't care. We're not about number of events. We're about actually putting capital at work. And so how are we going to rebuild confidence given the reputational risks that have happened in the last cycle?
Great. And actually, I'm going to take one more from Jad up front. I think had his hand up as well. Oh, come next round.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm Joanna from Travelist, which is a non-profit focusing on travel tech, and we account for 1 in 10 jobs in the travel space, as we know, and we're also responsible for 10% of emissions. So thinking about that as a backdrop, I'd love to hear more about data, both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of stories. As I think about the coalitions up on the stage today and the amazing work that's happening across sectors, I'd love to understand what more we need to do. Where are the gaps in some of the data, stories, and numbers in order to advance us in this space?
Okay, wonderful. I think 4 is my max. So maybe we'll start with the question from Ruth around resilience, you know, and repackaging what we're doing within that narrative. Maybe I can turn to some of the companies on stage to sort of share if and how that might be resonating in the engagements that you have. Either Matthias or Tim, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that resilience is really the term that I would use, because it suggests that we will return to a stage that we were in before. I think all we know about what's going to happen is we will wake up in a new world, and we have to adapt to that new world. So Nature, for example, if you want to read one Nature article in this month, read the one about what a moderate climate change scenario will do to agricultural yields. In a time where some people say we need to increase agriculture yields by 50%, researchers concluded, well, and it's actually quite a good study, we are on track to reducing agriculture yields by 10%. That would or will increase pressure on deforestation. So how can we deal with that? We already know that the direction of travel is pretty clear, is one of the questions I scratch my head. How can we make sure that with this supply and demand gap, we are not kind of getting back to the very solutions that accelerate the climate crisis, i.e. how can we stop the deforestation and land use change trends? So again, it's not going back to something that was, but dealing with a future that is predictably uncomfortable.
Great. Maybe just to keep us going then, and thank you, Matthias. On the question around complexity, and I think the question was maybe orientated a little bit more to the forest jurisdictional perspective for the stakeholders, you know, that are importantly delivering and partners in this work. How do we sort of demystify or simplify some of what are, you know, very complex systems and engagements, or can be, in the voluntary carbon markets?
So trying to answer, I think on reputational risk, the jurisdictional REDD+ reduce this reputational risk because with the strong governance, and this is what we are trying to support in the states like Mato Grosso here, our secretariat, and other states, to have these clear rules, framework, a regulatory framework with methodologies, and with what the states or the national level has to do. But I believe that what could bring less reputational risk and talking with the resilience as well on the ground is to have these jurisdictional systems with a strong participation of the local communities, of the civil society, together with the governments, the stakeholders of the governments, because then we could achieve long-term implementation of the climate policies.
Great. So ongoing engagement, consultation, sharing. Exactly.
And shorter the distance between the supply and the demand as well. And I think COP30 will be a great opportunity to understand better what is investing in Amazon, what is the challenges that we have, and what is this huge opportunity for us, forest countries, forest people, but for the whole world as well.
Great. Thanks, Gabriela. And maybe, John, to flip to the demand side of the equation, and I think simplification is part of that, but also the sort of broader confidence in the markets. How do we get the demand to step back in? And maybe Julia and Aaron, you can speak to that, and then I'll turn to Tim on the data question.
I'll briefly speak to the complexity piece and the the risk management, because I think they're sort of intertwined, actually, because these projects are really challenging and complex to get right. We need to simplify the process of engaging in the market, but not simplify the projects themselves, because they are complicated and complex. Engaging with different stakeholders in different types of interventions and different ecosystems with different governments. It's complicated. And the science of like ensuring you have the same, the actual intended impact. But we shouldn't have every company trying to evaluate what is a conservative approach to leakage, or multiple different definitions of, well, what is a conservative baseline look like where that's not needed, right? So how can we get convergence? How can we have efficiency in terms of not recreating the wheel on how we do diligence, and having different stakeholders who may want to engage with multiple different investors, go through multiple different due diligence processes with each of these different investors or each of those different companies. That's super resource intensive, super time intensive. We don't have time to do that, and nor should we expect local communities and project developers to have to engage in these really complicated processes multiple times. So at Symbiosis Coalition, we're thinking about, where can we not sacrifice the depth of rigor that's required to ensure confidence in the project's impact, but at the same time find ways to streamline that process and make it go faster to reduce the amount of resources that it takes. And I think one of the things in terms of reputational risk is relying on the latest science. We're putting together a technical advisory board of leading scientists to advise the coalition on an ongoing basis. That includes social scientists, it includes people with on-the-ground experience, it includes scientists, economists, et cetera, to guide us, but also acknowledging that the science will change. And we have to take a posture of, we're going to make the best decisions that we have today, that we know today, based on the best available science, and we're going to learn. And we're going to be transparent about when things work and when things don't. And I think that taking a posture of understanding that we're making the best available decisions we have today, recognizing that there's a time value to action, so we need to be biased to action, but also taking a conservative approach to know, okay, things, because these are so complicated, because these are so complex, we might not get everything right. And we as a community, as a society, need to acknowledge that and find a way to encourage action, to encourage taking action now with the best available science, being smart and conservative, but then learning as we go. And so that's the thing that I think would help in this market, is to sort of take a stance of, we're taking the most conservative, conclusive approach now, but learning as we go and sharing those lessons learned broadly so we can always do better.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I would just add, I mean, this is a complex market, and both on the supply and the demand side. And I think part of the role of the coalitions is to help simplify that. And we do, we have some corporations in the coalition who are deeply involved in understanding the science, getting involved in the ground, understanding all the ins and outs. But we have other coalition partners who are more hands off, right? And are looking to the coalition to simplify this. So on that, I think we do play a role. I think from a broader market perspective, I think we have let me say, integrity is important. But integrity, I think we have risked obsessing over integrity, especially on the supply side, and not paying enough attention to supporting the business case for corporate. So simplifying that. We had a breakfast. I was just at a breakfast earlier. We had a really robust conversation around what is the business case for corporates. Personally, I believe we should be also moving towards sort of a standard where every ton should be paid for, right? Whether through a compliance market or a voluntary purchase. That's my sort of personal view. I think that's a simpler way of thinking about demand. On the supply side, we spend a lot of time within the coalition thinking about how do we simplify the transactions for the host jurisdictions. I think we still have a ways to go, but that includes in our contracting, in the provision of technical assistance, understanding the market. Look, we're oftentimes when we at LEAF, we're dealing with forestry ministries. And so bringing in a conversation about the market can be, it's not something that they've been involved in the past. And so simply helping them understand that. And I think that is an evolution.
Wonderful. Thanks, Aaron. And what about on the topic of data, Tim?
I want to first celebrate one piece of data, and I see Ivo Mulder in the room at UNEP, who's responsible for UNEP's State of Nature Finance report. So they've reported in the last 4 years, private sector nature finance has gone up 11-fold to over 100 billion. So there's a lot of stuff happening outside of the voluntary carbon market as well. So let's celebrate that. Let's get that to $1 trillion a year at minimum. And I think that's feasible if the right data is in place. And in that context, I encourage all of you to think about AI, because that is transforming all the areas that we want to invest in and we work. There's 1 billion smallholder farmers in the world. It's impossible for any government to reach all of them in a meaningful way and have a conversation with them about what they should do, how they should register their land titles in the Amazon, to how they should do organic farming in India. So we're working, for example, with the Indian government on an outreach agent that can have multiple conversations in multiple languages at the same time with thousands of smallholder farmers, linking back to the government, and the government helping them to aggregate their buying power and give them better market access, give them better advice. So all of these things are happening. Silvera is a company we invest in that uses AI for carbon credit ratings. Pano AI is a company we invest in that does ultra early wildfire detection with AI. So there's a lot of things happening that will improve data quality for all the areas that we're interested in investing in collectively.
Jack, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to maybe make a comment on the data issue. When I mentioned earlier the 4 things that sort of have to happen to stop deforestation, and these are it's interesting because these are component pieces of what a jurisdictional scale REDD program would have to tackle in order to reduce emissions from deforestation and degradation. I think that what we're talking about is a fundamentally different economic model along the forest frontier. And what that means is something very different from what has happened in the past. Since the dawn of agriculture, the economic model in the rural areas has been to clear land, plant, and move on. And so we're finally reaching the end of that model. But I don't think we fully understand the economics behind a new model for agriculture or a new model for integrated rural development. And there's a lot to do in there in terms of data and analysis. So for example, if you're Brazil and you've got 100 million hectares, or the other day I heard 300 million hectares, but a lot of million hectares of degraded land. Okay, so what's the plan for that land? And is that going to be better putting 4 heads of cattle on the land rather than 1? And what are the economics of that? What are the opportunity costs of doing that? Or is it better to move that into soya and plant soya there so you're not encroaching on other lands in the Cerrado or in the Amazon itself? And so I don't think we have a full grasp of what this new economic model would look like, what the trade-offs are between forest, fuel, fiber, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. So it's a little bit of a macro scope look at things. And I know that there are people working on this, obviously, but I think we do need to sort of look at this in a much more broader way, because politicians are always going to be looking at this through the lens of economic growth, livelihood creation, and human well-being. That's where they're going to start and finish the conversation, not starting and finishing with climate, nature, or anything else. So let's get smart about that, I think.
Wonderful. We've got time, I think, for just one more brief question. Jad, up front.
I'm convinced. Everyone in this room is convinced. I actually think we're even winning the argument with the interconcentric rings of stakeholders that we need to convince to get that to reduce that reputational risk. My concern is we're not yet winning the argument with those broader stakeholder audiences who, as we know, ultimately kind of control the keys to this in terms of the ultimate reputational risk, for example, on the consumer side for the brands that we want to be involved. So my question is, what's the role for a narrative convergence? I feel like right now we're each trying to win this argument ourselves. And so the question is, what's the role for narrative convergence and bringing this together in a simplified narrative that's aimed at those broader audiences at big moments like this, like COP30, to get the ultimate reputational risk insurance that we need to get that brand buy-in ultimately over the long term?
Great point. Any reflections on that, Juliet?
I think it speaks to the importance of working collectively together. You know, I'm trying to think of ways as Symbiosis Coalition in this broader ecosystem, where can we not recreate the wheel? Where can we not duplicate efforts? We don't have time. And I think narrative is one really critical part that you mentioned. And keeping it simple, again, back to the complexity piece. People are not in the broader public are not going to engage at the level of market leakage versus activity shifting leakage and dynamic baselines, all the things that are really critical to have, you know, ensure that you have the sort of a scientific, rigorous approach to understand you have the actual impact. But how do we speak to both the head and the heart? That's something at Symbiosis that we're thinking about is when we've gone through our first RFP, we did a joint RFP. We've reviewed 185 different projects. We're aiming to announce our first set of projects that went through this sort of multi-stage diligence process before the end of the year, hopefully. And you know, one of the things that we'll be thinking about is how do we tell the story of what we did, not just from like the rigor of what we did, but telling the story of the actual impact on the ground from an economic livelihood perspective, from a nature and climate perspective. And I think really thinking about the storytelling piece and communicating the impact is really critical, and we can collectively work together to share different, depending on the different angle that you look at, whether it's protection and restoration, working forests, we need all of the above. How do they fit collectively together, to your point, Jack, about sort of larger landscapes, painting a picture of the future of larger landscapes that have carbon finance as a tool, have sustainable finance as a tool to drive impact and action? What does that future positive state look like? What does a green future look like? I think giving people a positive example to point to and working collectively towards that will be important to inspire people and show, speak in a way that resonates and is not just mired in the complexity of the market.
I can add something very quickly. Thanks for that question. I think the good news here, and that you'll know well, and many of us in the room, is that where we're working, nature, forests, that people intuitively resonate with. They get it in their gut, right? And so I think we've got an opportunity here. And storytelling is part of that, and talk about forests and talk about nature. Climate, to a lot of people, feels abstract. I think the challenging news, or maybe the bad news, is I fear that we've created way too much complexity in the kind of infrastructure around how people are talking about, especially net zero. To the average person, net zero SBTI really doesn't mean anything. So as we come out of this down cycle in the carbon markets, I think there's an opportunity for us to find a simpler message to hook into that doesn't talk about SBTI and mid-century reduction pathways to net zero. Nobody gets it, because, you know, I'm sure we all have friends and family who've asked, okay, what can I do personally to do something for the climate or for biodiversity or whatever it may be? And, you know, I think we all struggle a little with an answer. So there needs to be something that's simple that people can hook into. You mentioned LEED buildings. That's a good example in the building side. Okay, you know, get an office in a LEED building. We don't have that really for climate or biodiversity. I don't know if it's labeling. You know, I've got some ideas that I've talked to some of you about every ton, every time, but something that we can hook into, that when we go through this next phase that we went through a few years ago that led us to all these commitments to net zero, it's going to come again. I'm convinced, pendulum will swing and the momentum will go, and people will be saying, we don't know when it will happen, but people will be saying, what do we do around climate action? And what will happen is the boards of these companies will ask the CEOs, what are we doing? And they need to hook into something very simple.
Great.
And I think there's a broader conversation there. Thanks.
Yeah, there is a broader conversation there. And it's a great question. And it got the juices flowing there. I think, unfortunately, we're at time for the question and answer section. I do want to say thank you very much for the great questions and the great discussion and contributions from our panel. we're not wrapping up just yet. We do have a closing keynote. Very honored to introduce the UK Minister for Climate, Kerry McCarthy. He'll be joining us to share some of the perspectives of the UK government that has been spearheading so much of this work over the last few years and continues to do so here in London this week and going forward as well. So warm welcome to the stage, and thank you for being with us.
This feels a little bit far away from you, but it gives me somewhere I can balance my notes. So first of all, I thought that was a really interesting discussion. I was glad I could be here for most of it. Thank you to our host, Salesforce, Emergent, IT.org, and OneT.org, I believe is how I should say it, and the LEAF Coalition. And to everyone here, whether you're already engaged in investing in forests or whether you're here because you're interested in doing so. I've been in post for nearly a year now as Minister for Climate, and very much the focus now is on what we can achieve at COP30 in Belém, and it's good to see a good Brazilian presence here in London this week. And the fact that COP30 is being held in the heart of the Amazon obviously is highly symbolic, with forests very high on the agenda. And I don't need to tell you the importance of forests as carbon sinks, but they are incredibly important as carbon sinks, but also as that vital ecosystems. And we shouldn't forget the fact that they, the livelihood of over 1.5 billion people depend on them, and also their role in global economic stability in terms of trade in forest commodities, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that we can't keep 1.5, we can't keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees without urgent action to protect, restore and sustainably manage forests. And I would sort of say that keeping 1.5 alive is still very much what our mission is. We don't accept that that's not possible. Over 50% of global GDP depends on nature, and degrading it undermines the very systems business rely on. So acting on forests isn't, well, it's no longer a philanthropic add-on. It's a strategic imperative for resilient supply chains, credible net zero targets, and long-term shareholder value. And that's why the UK remains a leading supporter of high integrity forest finance. We gave support at the very beginning of the LEAF Coalition, which has seen over $270 million in signed agreements across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And I was privileged to attend an event at New York Climate Week last year, where we announced a deal with the state of Pará in Brazil, in the Amazon, and a really important moment. The UK is also leading through our work on market integrity, including the launch of the Principles for Voluntary Carbon and Nature Market Integrity. We launched those 5 principles at COP last year. I've just come, and we've been working since we've launched a consultation on what credible carbon markets would look like, working with VCMI, ICVCM and others to try to create those markets that are credible, effective and equitable. I've just come from an event at the London Stock Exchange to launch the Coalition to Grow Carbon Markets. And obviously we sort of hope that the investments that flow from doing all that work will very much benefit the forests. And that is partly building on what LEAF has shown about what can happen when the governments and private sector collaborate on this. LEAF supports the REDD+ approach that allows forest countries to take coordinated government-led action in partnership with the right stakeholders. And crucially, as we saw from the film in Ecuador, LEAF ensures that those who protect forests, the indigenous peoples and local communities, have a proper stake in their future. And I know that Brazil, with their COP presidency, are absolutely determined to make sure the voice of indigenous people are heard and are very much part of that discussion. And we very much support them in that. So I thank everyone in this room, whether you're London-based or have travelled to London to share your experience with this firsthand. As I said, the decisions that companies make this year will shape the forest finance agenda at COP30. There's an estimated $500 billion gap in finance for forests globally. So that means we know that public money is tight. As I've said, we will be doing our bit as the UK government to support these initiatives, but we absolutely have to harness the power of private finance to make this work. And that's why we need more companies to join initiatives like LEAF, Symbiosis and OneT.org. It's not just good climate policy, it's good business strategy for you. Research shows that businesses engaging in high integrity carbon markets are decarbonising faster than their peers. And we know that there are economic benefits to companies that flow from that. So the solutions exist, the momentum's building. If you're already investing, please go further. If you're just beginning, this is the moment to step up. And we really appreciate the efforts of everybody involved to make this happen. It's transformational. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we've heard a really compelling call to action from the minister. We've heard a compelling call to action from the private sector, and we've heard it from the partners, the jurisdictions, the communities that are doing the hard work on the ground as well. So with that, we're going to close today's session. I think I might steal Julia's phrase of resonating with both the head and the heart to take even the smallest step into this space. Please reach out to any of the organizations that have been represented here today. We're available now to continue the discussion, continue the discussion through the week, but importantly, to take action and to take action now because the urgency is there, the solutions are there. We all now just need to collectively move in the same direction. So with that, a big thanks to all of you for taking the time out in a very, very busy week, and a huge thanks to Salesforce for hosting us yet again and our panelists. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.